The other thing that you should know is Monica is part of this. She can be a large part. In fact, in Chicago, I even asked her to come on stage and answer one, because as the archivist, as she has listened to so many things and been so aware and remembers lots more than I do, even about the things that Kryon might have said. And so I may ask her to fill in the blank sometimes on these things, because she's very good at that. Okay? Let's go.
Thank you. My question is, what does Kryon think about all of the vaccines they're trying to mandate for all of these amazing children coming in? I have a dear friend in my heart that is a hardcore anti-vaxxer, and she feels like they're losing the battle. So do you have any thoughts or input or anything that I can share with her to let her know? You're good?
I'm not sure you're going to want to share this. First of all, Kryon is very silent about current events, but not about the attributes. For instance, while all this was going on, I may have said this before to this crowd, but I'm saying it for the recording as well. Kryon said to the government, he said, purchase one less submarine and put together a department of compassion. And that department would then be completely funded to take care of these things in integrity, in a way that we could vet those coming in, keep the criminals out, make sure the families were together, and do it correctly. And the problem is funding, really. And so I love that. Build one less submarine and have a department of compassion for immigrants and for those trying to get into the country. Our country was built with immigrants. This is how it happened. And so that's the only thing I can tell you. Of course, we're looking at a compassionate thing rather than what's going on now. I'm hoping, I really am hoping, because this is so visible and so awful, that these things will change, and we will make them change, because now we're seeing things. Some of these things have been going on through several generations, presidents even, and we haven't been aware of it. And now we are. And that's probably a good thing, that the light is being turned on and we're seeing it. So I guess what I'm saying is not specific, but in general, yes.
Hi, thanks for my question. What has Kryon said about initiations and activations and transmission of energy? And how has that changed from 30 years ago till now?
All of those things are, would you call them attributes of communication? Except for activation. I think almost everything you said, transmission, and all of those things. And they are not that generic. In other words, I mean, they're specific of whether you're talking about angels, entities, ETs, DNA. And I will tell you, it doesn't matter what you're talking about, all of those things are radically being changed in the new energy. Now, if you pick just one, activation, let me talk about that. Now, we're going to come back to you, even though I told you that there's only one question. When you said activation, what was on your mind at that moment when you said that word?
As far as energy work,
okay,
that you need an activation to be able to use that energy.
Okay, here's what's changed. Let's talk about this. Kryon actually said in channel, and also he's talked to me in the shower. Kryon talks to me in the shower. Is that all right? He said activation is starting to be a word we're not going to use anymore. And one of the reasons is we're used to hearing that we're going to activate something which would indicate that it has not been activated. And it would also indicate that we've got to do something like turning a switch. And now Kryon says in the new energy, many of these things are turning their own switch. And so you're waking up to having been activated before you ever learned that that you're supposed to activate. So activating energy, activating things in yourself, activating your DNA, activating this and that. This is a language we're used to having. And it was necessary. But now Kryon is saying, I want you to start thinking more about the things that you would normally activate may very well be activating themselves. And I like that. I like that all. So a lot. So start thinking before you decide to activate energy or whatever. Think to yourself, is it possible that my intent has already done it? And that is, for me, that is an empowerment that we didn't actually have before. I came out of an era, and all these 30 years of working with New Age people, that activating their DNA and activating whatever was absolutely normal. Now we're going to sit down and activate this energy. Or you're going to do it yourself, and you're reading a book on how. And now Kryon is really saying, think before you even do that, because this new energy may have already activated it. You may be working, and this may be happening. And you actually you hold yourself back if you think that you've got to throw that switch and activate it or do something when it's already been done. So that's how I would answer that. Transmission, it's the same. We're receiving things and sending things automatically. Whereas before, there was a little more thought into when, where, and how. So a lot of people are actually receiving wonderful, intuitive ideas and thoughts, and even little ones and big ones. Like, for instance, to get you here, there are many who said, I had to come. And I was in the shower and I was told I had to come. And I didn't know the day before, and here I am. So this is the kind of transmissions we're getting now that are a lot more free and open and personal and a little unexpected, I would say, for some of us. It's always, when I started getting things in the shower from Kryon, it was unexpected. I thought that was a weird place. But I think it has to do with the negative ions in the water and all that. Also, I would go into the shower and ask Kryon questions when I was in trouble. On certain days, I got real clean. But that was a purposeful transmission. Now, I don't ever do that, because even before I think about it, Kryon's talking to me. You see the difference?
Lovely. Thanks, Lee. Next question.
Hi, Lee. Can you update us on where we are on desalinization, the new...
I'd love to. I'm close to this. I'm closer than I ever thought I would be, because we've run into a number of people who said, I've got funding, if you can show it to me. And that suddenly out came those who were doing it. Now, Kryon has said numbers of times that this is the future, and this is why you're asking it. We need this, because water is the next gold. We need water, and we need it in places we haven't had it before. Our biggest cities are still on the coasts, and this is where would be most valuable. And Kryon has said what you have now is a very inefficient way of desalinating. It won't work. It has to do with evaporation and water and electricity, water of course, but heat and electricity. And it takes too long. You've got standing tanks and all this. It's not going to work. So Kryon has given just one of many ideas, including micro-robotics. He said, one of the things he said in Channel, he said, make the salt magnetic and then pull it out. Okay, that is being done. And I don't think anybody heard that and did it. I think that was being done while Kryon talked about it. That's one. The other one, which has intrigued me, is make water molecules a bit different without changing them for our health, so that they won't have salt, so they will reject the salt. And these are all processes that are mostly physics, but what Kryon says what they need to be is real time. So no standing tanks, no heat, no evaporation, in and out, in large volumes. And since Kryon talked about that and started maybe 3 to 4 years ago, I will tell this group, both of those things I know about, and they're here. Now, the next step is always the hardest one. It's not just the funding, but it's the funding and the logistics and the practicality of it. In one case, the one person with the invention is so afraid it'll be stolen that he doesn't want it even funded. I mean, now we're into fear. Fear of old energy and what's happened to old inventions and the whole thing. So now we're steering into areas that we're realizing are very old energy things that we've got to get around to release these things. But this is where it's going. Absolutely where it's going. Desalinization is one of the two things that Kryon says is coming and is necessary, and when it arrives, you'll breathe easier. Or closer.
And the only thing I'll add to that is there was a channel given by Kryon which went into the future, and it described what was called salters that were going up and down the west coast of United States, and they were fixing the salt solution levels. So that's far into the future, probably a little bit further away.
The ocean does it naturally. It evaporates and replaces naturally. We never have to worry about that. If we're going to pull a lot of salt out of the ocean, there will be a problem, because desalinating the ocean is not a good thing. So you want to put it back in very, very carefully. And Kryon said that in the future you may have salters, which are those ships which come back and going back and putting it in, not in mass, but slowly where it was taken out, so that you don't affect the reefs or the fish that need it or any of the salinization issues. So it has to be done carefully. We've never had to think about that. You realize in any of our desalinization, it has been so marginal and so slow that the ocean just doesn't care. Yeah. But if we start doing it a lot, and we're building lakes that are, all that, and sucking it out of our oceans, we're going to have to replace some of the salt in the areas that we take it.
Yeah, great. Next question.
So I know Kryon talks about the coming cold spell. I'm curious to know, does he talk about the longevity once it's here?
First, well, I'm going to just start very clearly in this crowd. Texans, you're fine. You're fine in the area of cold and hot. But when this earth starts to change temperatures, and it has before, and I'm going to get you there in a minute. Anytime you have high and low pressure, hot and cold changes on this planet, you create storms. So Texas, you may not have to worry about the cold, but there's going to be more storms. And you are susceptible to those. And so that's just coming with the territory. And what is the territory? The territory goes like this. Years ago, Kryon said it's going to get colder. Now, this corresponded at that time with the global warming movie. And all the things that followed were global warming, global warming, global warming. Again, I would like to celebrate Greg Braden for his courage, because it was Greg who did a lot of the research on this and said something's weird and wrong with this, and he was right. When he started saying, are those people going back far enough and looking at the ice cores from the ancients and all, we discovered it's a cycle. Subsequent to that, there's many scientists and meteorologists who realize now this is a cycle that Earth has gone through many times, but we haven't necessarily been around to record it. Does that make sense? And it starts with heat. So it starts with hot spells. It also does something else that's phenomenally important that you know about. And Greg Braden found this out through testing the ice cores. Now, ice cores is you drill into the ice, and what you get is levels of ice that have been there thousands of years ago. And so you start analyzing the oxygen contents, carbon dioxide, all these things, and it tells a story. What was the weather like? What happened? How much rain was there? All that. And it goes back hundreds and hundreds of years, if not thousands. And what we found out in this cycle is that not only is there warming before the cycle to help melt the ice, but also before the cold spell comes, there's always an increase in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, even with no humans there. You see what I'm saying? So the actual, so you look at the people who would take this to task, meet a task, and they have said, look, there's carbon dioxide, we put that in the air. Now, some of that is true. In other words, I'm agreeing. Stop the pollution. Stop pollution of the water, of air, and all. Kryon says if you don't, it'll kill you, but it's not going to kill the earth. This is for us, so stop polluting. But on the grander cycle, there is a cycle of cold and warm on this planet, and it does it to refresh the oceans. It does it to refresh the life in the oceans, including dying reefs that are dying without any pollution anyway. And they're dying for numbers of reasons, and you say, well, the water levels are changing and the temperatures are changing and they're dying because of that. Yes, they are. This is because this is what Gaia does, and there's evidence that it has done it over and over and over because it refreshes the cycle of life, fish, and all of those things, and it all comes back. And then there are the reefs that are dying because we pollute them. So it's two separate subjects going on here. Here's what Kryon says. There's cold coming. If you got friends in North Dakota, there always may be snow on the ground. You see where we're going with this? So there's a mini ice age coming. Duration, that's what you're asking about. How soon? He gave a time frame. Was it 15 years, and now it's maybe 12?
Yeah,
He said,
anywhere between 10
Yeah.
years now.
yeah, and he said this is when it's going to be obvious. When it's obvious is when it stays colder longer, and people are going to say it's colder now than it's ever been before. Bang! Grant gave us a channeling about this, and the next day we had the polar vortex. Do you know about the polar vortex? Now, this was the weather that came down from the pole and visited the United States in such a way that we had, minus 40s and 50s and just crazy stuff that we'd never seen before. That's what we're talking about. The polar vortex was not a one-off. It's coming back, and you'll have more of that more often. This is simply part of what's going on in the planet. Now, about us, all of us, we're going to survive all of it. It's not an issue that says it's going to wipe out humanity. Just get ready for it. I tell my Florida friends, there's going to be, build your houses on stilt. Gary, build your house on a stilt. Where are you, Gary? Did you go away? In other words, prepare. I tell the people who are in the north, it's against the law to use a wood-burning stove for pollution reasons in many states. It's not against the law to own them. So when you have the biggest issue, when you have the power centralized grid go down, and it will, because the lines will go down, it cannot contain the demand for heat, and your power goes out, you're going to need to burn wood. These are the kinds of things we tell our friends in the north. And also, Kryon says, you're going to need sooner or later, and we got 10 years to work with it, and this is the second thing, the big invention that's coming, decentralized grid. Grids are gone. You cannot have grids anymore. The old idea is you got one generating plant cranking, and all the wires go out to your house where you have electricity. Kryon says what it's going to have to be, and it's already starting, watch for this, is smaller power plants now are more efficient using different ways of creating power, and something else is coming, that is for neighborhoods. So neighborhood, sometimes individual homes, because the grid's going to fail. It has to. It's already failing now. I don't know how many of you experience rolling blackouts when there's too much, when it's too hot. Or that'll tell you how your grid is doing. Is it can't keep up with the demand of the population who needs electricity to cool and heat. So we're going to be going to another kind of electricity, another kind of distribution, which is not distributed from a source that is central. That's the grid. And so this is the other thing, that in the north especially, they're going to have to get off the grid. I was in Montreal years ago when they had a deep freeze and an ice storm. Nothing moved. The winds, the ice pulled down the wires. Have you ever seen an ice storm? The ice pulls it solidifies on the wires that are both telephone and also power, and pulls them down. Even the great big towers are susceptible to this. Ice is really heavy. It brings down airplanes. And it brings down the wires, and the towers fall down. There goes your electricity. Happened in Montreal. And I was there, or that happened the next day, or whatever. People died in their homes. They couldn't get out. They couldn't go anywhere. They couldn't even, the sidewalks were freezing. Seniors are especially susceptible to that. These are the kinds of things that Kryon talks about. The reason Kryon is saying now that there's this coming is so we get ready. and we're smart, and we can get ready. And my favorite thing, and Kryon says it's coming, and now we have two people who I've actually seen the pictures, and it's here, it's not free energy. There's no such thing. It is using magnets to push and pull against each other, which they will do for thousands of years while you're having to recharge them, in a scenario that turns wheels and then makes electricity. Does this sound reasonable? You ever played with a magnet, a group of magnets, and you have to pull them apart or push them? It's tough. And you keep them in a drawer for 4,000 years and pull them out again, honestly, that long, and they'll still be there. They don't exhaust themselves. This is a power source. We just haven't figured it out. Now we have, and just now beginning. You know where this can go? Picture for a moment just how this new invention, I hope my children see it, my grandchildren see it, who knows, I might see it. Imagine for a moment you have a phone in your pocket that is perpetual forever, never needs charging. You know why? Because there's a tiny little magnetic engine, miniaturized with a little wheel that's going around and around because magnets are pushing and pulling it, and it's always charging. So every single device you have always charges itself perpetually. Imagine an electric car. You've seen electric cars lately? You've seen the Tesla and all that with batteries and all that? Kryon says that's going to change dramatically. There's something coming called the super cap, he says. There's something coming where you would have be able to charge that car perpetually all the time with a little engine, little magnetic engine in the trunk. And so it never needs recharging. It's always charging. Now you've got an electric car, non-polluting, that you don't even have to plug in, and it's always charging. Did this interest you? It interests me a lot. This is the offshoot of that engine, that magnetic engine, which is here in miniature. I've seen it. I've seen a picture of it. They're starting to get it. Finally, they're starting to get it. Magnetics is the answer to these things because it pushes and pulls forever, and there's no exhaust. I get excited. Can you tell I get excited?
I love that you get excited. Next question.
So, hi. I listened to one of your channelings, and you talked about, this is so fascinating to me, about microbes going into the body and bringing in the consciousness to heal cancer. Can you talk a little bit about that? And timeline. When do you think this is going to happen?
You know, there's more. There's cancer. Someday we're going to go back and look at it like polio. There's so many here that don't even know what I'm talking about. I was in grade school when they cured polio. And up to that point, there were drives, and there were so many kids I knew that were on crutches. Polio was a really big deal until they found what caused it and cured it. This is going to happen with cancer on several layers. Esoterically, the one that's the hardest to believe is that as we vibrate higher, have a higher consciousness, disease has a vibration. And disease can come in and attach itself to us if we are a lower vibration, and it cannot if we are higher. This is esoteric talk, as it has not been proven yet, and people are rolling their eyes and laughing even as they listen to this later on a recording. And someday, it's going to be in Scientific American. And they're going to wonder why it is that certain consciousnesses are not catching things. And they're going to start understanding that what you think you are, and your cells respond, and over, and here it comes. Cancer, there's going to be other things that are coming, some things that I cannot reveal that I know are there that are hiding in plain sight, that nobody's talking about. We are on the cusp, I think, of a cancer cure on several levels. When? Soon. Now, when I say soon, and Kryon says soon, we can change that. And what I mean by that, it can be held back with low energy, with greed, any of these things. We've got to stay circumspect as a population, looking at who's doing what. And it's going to be transparent, I think, very soon. If a drug company, we find out, you've known about this cancer cure, you did research on this and found it worked, and you did what with it? You put it in the drawer? Would you like to tell me about that? I've lost 3 friends, and I want to talk to you about that.
Next question.
Yes.
I'm sorry, your time's up.
Are you going to read? He's pulling out the notes now. You know?
My question is, does Kryon or other beings on the other side of the veil have, like, do they get mad or disapprove? And how do they express that to us? Or is that just like our ego stepping in?
You know, it's neither one of those. It's not ego. You know what it is? It's one of Kryon's biggest messages. What we tend to do, and this is very, very, this is so explainable, is we put the highest consciousness we can think about is our own. Humans. That's how we think. And we put it on God. So suddenly God gets mad. God is a war in heaven. God is a fallen angel. God is disappointed. God's going to judge you. This is human nature. Kryon, one of the funny things that Kryon said, and I can remember it in a channel once, he said, if we were all dogs, then God would be a dog. And all the angels would go around smelling each other. This is what we do. And so the idea of an angry God or God is displeased is all our own making, because this is the best we've got. And I tell people, if you could dismiss all of this and think about a beautiful creating source called God or Spirit that is so far above any consciousness you can believe, that's pure compassion and love and doesn't have any of those consciousnesses and doesn't have emotions and feelings like we do, genders or anything, you're looking, this is more, it's closer than you would ever have. So it's the ego, sure. It's the fact that the best we can do is we think of God as a father or Santa Claus or any of these things. This is the best. Now, one of the good news things in Channel, Kryon says that with an elevated consciousness, you're going to start getting it. You're going to start seeing God as the magnificent energy that it is. And I don't even want to call it an entity, because it's another thing. We're singular. We look in the mirror and there's one of us. So there's one God, he's got one face, and all of these things. And God is a multi-dimensional energy that created the universe that can be in me and my cells and also in all of the universe. How is that possible? And I'll tell you, I don't know. I just know it's true. I know what love is, because when I sit in Channel, it sits on me. This is how I know. And I know that God cannot be angry.
Beautiful. Next question.
I know that we always talk that we're love and light, but you say Kryon is a magnetic energy. Are we all magnetic energies?
No, Kryon is never said he's a magnetic energy. He's a magnetic master. And that puzzled me for years, because I thought I had an angel that I could paste on the refrigerator. I never understood that. Magnetics, the reason Kryon speaks about magnetics is not because we are magnetic. I'll give you the source really quickly. When Kryon arrived all those years ago, he made these statements, and channeling in a little bit in the books, he said, I'm here to move the magnetic grid of the earth for a while, until about 2003 or 4, when the grid group leaves.
It was 2002.
2002, thanks, sweet. And this was the message. I didn't understand that either. Now I do. I understand fully the magnetic master was here to move the grid. Why would he move the grid? Go to the research, especially the research that HeartMath did about what happened at 9/11. And what happened at 9/11 is that they discovered that the magnetic grid of the earth actually went up in strength, and it was measured by satellites. Absolutely in sync with when we had the compassion of billions of people see that on TV. And what it did was to increase the magnetic strength of the grid, telling you right there that consciousness and magnetics are linked. So the magnetic grid of the earth actually then, you have to say, has got some kind of link to consciousness. Now, Kryon says he's moving the magnetic grid, and it would move more, he said, in 10 years than it had in 100. It did. And then it stopped. If you go to your research, you'll find this true. Remember when all the whales were beaching themselves, that was the time, because they have magnetite in their brains. They navigate with magnetics. Birds do the same thing, they've discovered, for migration. They know where to go because they have little compasses built in. So suddenly the magnetic grid moves, and where it used to be clear ocean, there's a beach. And so they were running into the beaches. That's now corrected. The calves know to go around, and that stopped. If you see, that was only temporary. If you know about flight, you will know that runway numbers, the ones that are painted on the runways, are compass headings. And that's how pilots know. They line up with 4 5s, 45 degrees, and they come in. Almost all of those have been repainted because the grid changed. The compass will show it. You can do the research. This is what Kryon said to look for, and that's what happened. Why? He had to realign that because it relates to consciousness that we're going to need when we pass 2012. And we did. So it's almost like laying a new grid work for a higher evolved human being. That's why Kryon is here. That's the magnetic master. We are not necessarily magnetic, although I will tell you at the cellular level, there's a whole lot of magnetics that's involved. Yeah.
Great. Next question. Ooh, 3 in a row here. I'm going to pick the one in the middle.
3 in a row.
So I remember listening to Kryon talk, and he mentioned eventually that we would focus on certain parts of ourselves. Has there been any, update on that, or?
I'm not exactly sure what you're talking about specifically, but I will tell you this, that we're about ready to do an exercise that has to do with the heart and measuring of the heart and the coherence of the heart. And you may be talking about that because the heart, Kryon talked about the triad. Maybe that's where you were going to go. And that involves the heart and the brain, the pineal. And this was fairly new, but what Dr. Wolf is going to tell you is that we now know that the heart has a magnetic field that's at least 100 times larger than the brain. So we are becoming more heart-focused, both physically and as metaphysically and metaphorically, because the heart, what happens when we say, you drop into your heart or use your heart? This is the switch to compassion from the linearity of intellect. And that's the whole thing. So we're going to be a heart-based humanity instead of an intellectual-based humanity. And there's more.
Great. And the one next to you, I want to...
Okay, so I'm wondering, what does Kryon have to say about time travel? And also, you were talking about reincarnation earlier, so do we have a choice in which lives we incarnate into? So meaning, like, we're all in our own physical bodies with our certain names. Do we choose that before, and so on and so forth?
Sure. What was the first?
What does Kryon have to say about time travel?
Oh, yes, time travel. Yeah. Okay, nothing.
It's all now. It's all now.
Yeah. Not to say it isn't possible, but that's not been really mentioned. But what has been mentioned is the second part of your question. You did ask 2 questions. I heard that. I really did hear the question. Can I just tell you that there is such a beautiful message on reincarnation, and I touched on it early, and that is that we are not in some kind of a system where we're cranked through like in school. We're not part of a hierarchy. You can't imagine yourself when you're not in your body. You are actually, according to Kryon, a piece of God, of the Creator. You are angelic when you're not here. You're not in some body in being tortured someplace or in heaven in a rocking chair, as we've been told. You are instead yourself, but beautiful, magnificent part of God. In that, if you want to call it a system, what Kryon has said, there is common sense, there is love, there's beauty, there's desire to what to do next based upon what is best for the planet. And when you come back in, of course, you choose. You choose it all. And there is also a benevolence, if you want to call it a system, that keeps it easy and gentle. So you're not reincarnated constantly in other places with other genders and have to start over. And your Akash is needed for you to, it's like a school. It really is. Every time you come in, it's a layer of school. And you learn things, and when you come back again, that's in your Akash so that you can pick it up and keep going. And supposedly you become wiser. And this is why we call a wise old soul. Now, in your case, I don't know why you would ask this, and if you had just an interest in it, but I love the fact that you have, because there's so much more there than you even ask. Can I just tell you my favorite part? To some people, they say their favorite part is that what Kryon has mentioned is that they have full choice. They're not forced into a family. Because so many people end up in a family and go, I would never have chosen this. And the answer is yes, you did. You did to help your family, or perhaps to help the planet in some way. You perhaps chose to come down and experience friction. Do you know some people come down to experience suicide? Because it kicks their parents in the butt. And in the process, their parents find out things about God and themselves and help the planet. Did you ever think of that? There are things you don't want to think have happened, because the mind of God that we have when we make these choices is far, far greater than anything that we could choose. I'll tell you mine quickly here, and then we'll have another question or two. I always wondered about the gender issue. Am I going to come back a woman or a man? Do I have a choice? And, if I did, I would never, of course, choose a woman. So why? It was just like, so there's a bias there. I loved the answer that Kryon gave. It says, every single one of you has been the other. It's necessary for the wisdom that you would have, and in the planet you want to carry the results of the school, and the school is going to then train you, the school of Earth, is what it's like to be both, because someday you have to relate to your partner in a way that's new, with a compassion that's new, and all of that we're starting to understand in relationships, because that's a big one that's starting to change between men and women. And so Kryon says that every single one of us goes through a system, if you want to call it a system, a plan, if you want to call it that we agree with and understand, where we are the same gender over and over and over and over and over. Now, that's the best thing I can think of, because when you arrive and you're the same gender, it's comfortable. Then there's the switch. And Kryon says, when you switch to the other gender, you stay there for a long time. However, the first 2 lifetimes of the switch are difficult. And in that, you find the gay people. Because they are now in one kind of a body with another kind of a caution remembrance. Do you see this? Up to 10% of the earth is always gay. It is absolutely natural. It is the way of it. And I love the fact that more and more of the earth is starting to realize love is love. It's normal, it's fine, and you're not going to hell. Okay? I still would rather come back as a man. Thank you.
And I just want to add to that for resources, because this subject has so much more information. And the channels on Lee's website, kryon.com/free audio, they have titles on them. And there's many that are called Soul Journeying, Soul Communication. When you go back and listen to those, Kryon really expands on that whole subject of soul planning, soul sharing, soulmates, things like that. I've condensed all of that into my 3rd book called The Human Soul Revealed, which actually has question and answers to Kryon that brings even more information out. But I'm not saying that so you buy the book, but you can go to the book and find what channels they are, which you can get for free. So there's a whole lot of information that you can access. Thank goodness, because of Lee saying yes 30 years ago.
Well, thank goodness that you've decided to index them and find out where they are.
Next question.
Greetings, family. a part of me is embarrassed to ask this, but I'm going to anyway. It's going to go very woo-woo. Yesterday you taught us more about Lemuria, and you also talked about how there were other species of human that left, and you mentioned like giants and dwarves and things like that. So that got me thinking about other subjects along those lines. And so what I want to ask is, in many Aboriginal cultures and cultures around the world, there are talks of other intelligent creatures that we now think of as myth, like elves and, things of that nature, elves, dragons. And so I want to know.
I love it. This is a great question.
And dragons.
Yeah. Now you said dragons twice, and you're about ready to say it a third time.
Yeah, so I have a bias. I love dragons.
I can tell. You're a dragon guy. All right.
Were they real? And if they were, where are they now? Are there any around, and what happened to them, and what, that kind of stuff?
Some of them, I will tell you.
He missed unicorns. Let's add that in.
Yeah, let's add unicorns.
Mermaids. I'm getting many mermaids.
Yeah.
Yes. All those guys. Mermaids, mermen, all of that.
Kryon has not said yes or no, but he's indicated that we had 5 other civilizations on this planet and over 30,000 years. There had to be other kinds of animals that we had that we will eventually find evidence of, and there could very well have been a dragon. I have to remember, and you're very careful. It's Joseph Campbell who actually addressed it a little of this. And he said that every single society, whether it's Asian, Aborigine, or whether it's whatever, talks about dragons. And sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad, sometimes they mean wealth, sometimes they mean health, sometimes they're just metaphoric, but they're still talking about dragons. So I believe there's something there. No evidence yet, but I expect it. I don't think it's going to be a shock if they find eventually there was. Now, whether they were fire-breathing or whether that is going to be part of the storytelling and the mythology, I'm not sure. But I think there's a seed truth in that. But can I then flip the page? And you mentioned elves and things. Other life forms, they're not part of what disappeared with the different kinds of humans that Scientific American talked about. These are here today. These are multidimensional life forms. I have seen a couple, and Kryon talks about what would you call an angel? That's not human? Is it celestial? Is it is it life? Here we go. Is an angel a life form? And so. That's, let's write a treatise. Does it reproduce? Does it do it? And the answer is it doesn't meet the biological parameters, but it's so many, through history, they've seen something. What is it? I was in Ireland. Did you know that the leprechaun ideas, the little people, is so prevalent there for so long that even the government knows? They have fairy trees that they won't cut down. All of these things are part not just of folklore, but they are really part of their reality and truth. Divas in the forest, I've seen them. It's one of the only things I've actually seen. And I didn't know I would. I never thought I would because I don't usually see things, and I did in Tasmania. And it made me a believer. You'd think I would believe anyway, but hey, I got a man brain, and when you say, well, I saw this or that, I'd say, that's nice. Let me see it, because that's who I am. I saw it. I know there are multidimensional life forms here on this planet, and I know they occasionally show themselves. Now, here's what's fun. They're almost always benevolent and small, and that's because they're safe. They have to be. So they become benevolent and small. There's also places where they tend to be more than others because of the magnetic grid anomalies, and that's probably what you're going to talk about if you were. I saw you carry your computer over there.
I was hoping to share more on the dragon information.
Okay. This is going to be. This is the last question because but she's now going to share what Kryon or something about dragons.
If you don't mind me
We don't mind.
sharing
We love
this.
dragons.
And we have a Kryon host who lives in Brazil. His name is Gustavo, and he is following the Kryon work for many years and loves looking at the metaphors and mythology, very much the dragons as well. So through the correspondence of Gustavo and Lee, this is why I feel I now want to share it with you, because you are so dragon energy.
No, let's call him. What do you,
Dragon boy, let's call him.
We have Dragon Man right here.
Dragon Man?
Dragon Man, okay.
So, and the thing was with Gustavo, he found a few passages in previous Kryon channels that talked about dragon energy. And he quoted this back to Lee. So then he's asking Lee more questions on dragon energy in Kryon. So I'm going to just read part of the correspondence that was sent, where Lee said, let's update what dragon energy means from Kryon now that we're past 2012. I asked Kryon to be clearer on what this is, and Kryon began with a list. So take a look at what dragons mean to humans. Number 1, very powerful. Number 2, ancient. Number 3, very dangerous. Number 4, controllable only by a few. 5, they can create fire. And 6, they are magic-based. Now the dragon, it represents a paradigm of consciousness that came from the Pleiadians. It is something they had after millennium of being enlightened, but they could not teach it. It was far, far beyond what any normal human being was able to comprehend. And yet, it lays dormant in all DNA, ready to be discovered with time. So let's unravel the puzzle of those 6 items that were listed. 1, very powerful. So extremely powerful and intense consciousness, force that shapes physics with thought. It comes from the creative source and it's simply not stoppable. 2, very ancient. It's as old as any life in the universe and it's in all DNA. But until the DNA is awakened to be multidimensional, it cannot be seen or used. Now 3, very dangerous. Unless this force is fully understood and used within the parameters of high consciousness, it can be deadly. It can terminate life immediately. Just like when a child tries to work with an enormous power tool and they have no idea how to make it work. So the tool was created for helping humans, but unless the child understands it fully, it can destroy. Now, number 4, controllable only by a few. So in mythology, no human can control a dragon unless they speak dragon. Now, a human can only speak this language if they have awakened into high Pleiadian ways and knowledge. Now, that means that as a powerful and ancient and dangerous as it appears, this energy is totally submissive to pure love and compassion, which are attributes of the Pleiadian race. And it's learnable eventually by humanity. Now, number 5, they can create fire. If you came across a creature who is able to breathe fire, it is horrifying. Fire is a caustic weapon that usually comes from the mouth. Now, the metaphor means that dragon energy can be weaponized. Therefore, it will never be revealed to a low consciousness civilization. Breathing fire means anger, devastation, intimidating energy filled with death. So the manipulation of physics can create the fire of the sun. And in your holy Bible, it is quoted, Revelation 1:16, and he had in his right hand 7 stars, and out of his mouth was a sharp 2-edged sword to strike the nations. So this scripture was given as a foretelling of a potential chaos past 2012. And note the fact that there are 7 stars. Does this tell you where this energy might be from. It's a prophecy about the destruction of a planet by an energy that would be used by low consciousness and the weaponization of atomic structure itself. So number 6 was magic-based, and things that are not understood or outside 3D reality, they seem to be magical. Yet the human being has a direct connection with multidimensional energy, and they can create things in real life that are beyond anything that your science realizes. So therefore, magic is everywhere, and it's available to a human being who starts to understand that the power of consciousness and thought is powered by love and compassion for all things. So therefore, dragon is a very high consciousness and powerful tool of the future. It's pure Pleiadian science, but it's intermingled with control from a very high consciousness. It's not understood and it can't be conceived of. It also represents the master number 77. So one of the meanings it has is divine energy at the right time and right place. So when Kryon is speaking this, you can start seeing the metaphors of what is held in our collective consciousness and how it's being expressed.
Thank you, Monica, for that. Wow. So let me just finish with number 7, which is not on that computer. Everybody loves a story. What if? Where did you come from, soul? Do you think you just arrived on this earth in the last 200,000 years, and what were you doing before that? You ever think about that? What if you were involved in other planets, doing this? What if this is what souls do? And what if on those other planets you look just pretty much like you do now? Life is life. It evolves a certain way. Depending upon gravity and air and all, you might be a little taller or shorter. But you probably looked about the same, in general. What if this test we've gone through is a test that many have gone through? Information that we have received over and over about the beauty of what the Pleiadians went through is they went through what we went through. They had their 2012 a long, long time ago. They had planetary genocide. They actually occupied, technically, other planets in their system, which they had destroyed. They went through something a lot worse than the Holocaust that we went through. And yet, they pulled themselves out and had their 2012 and began a very, very slow but methodical evolving consciousness. And over hundreds of thousands of years, that consciousness took place so that they did not necessarily need the corporeal body. High consciousness can control physics. Is it possible that you were a Pleiadian? Do you ever think of that? You now have the same DNA, 23 pairs of chromosomes, that they have. Did you know that they were seeded by the Arcturians, who did the very same thing, who went through the same tests? Do you think maybe you were an Arcturian? How old are you? Here's the big deal. In your Akash, what limitations? Is it just Earth Akash? Or does it sometimes spill over into interplanetary Akash? Is it possible you remember things from other lives and other planets? Are you with me? Okay, what if you were in a world filled with dragons? It means that's the Akash that comes in now. It's real, it's mythology, and yet you know it was flesh and blood at one time. And this may be part of it. That's number 7, not written down.